In this section, we'll learn how to build a RESTful API using Laravel 10. We'll start by creating CRUD, or create, read, update, and delete functionalities. Then, in the upcoming section, we'll implement Sanctum in our API. Alright, let's open up our terminal and create our new project. I'll come back when it's finished. Once it's finished, let's cd into our newly created project. Then, I'll open the project in the Visual Studio Code Editor. Here, I'll start up the Laravel built-in server. Then, I'll go to my browser, then enter a localhost, 8000, just to make sure that the Laravel project is running properly. And he will see the Laravel landing page displayed on the screen. The next thing that we need to do is to set up the database connection. So let's switch back over to our editor. Then open up the .env file. Here, I'm going to use my SQL database. So I'll leave all of these things, except for the password, since I have a password for my database. Next, let's create a new database for our app. Let's copy the database name from here. And here, I'll use MySQL CLI to create my database. Feel free to use any MySQL client tools you prefer. So let's switch back over to our terminal. I'll open a new terminal window, then create a new database using this command. I'll hit Enter key. Enter my password. Then hit the Enter key again. Okay, everything seems good. Now, to verify if our database connection is working properly, let's execute this command. php artisan migrate. It seems that I forgot to save the last change. So let me save this. Then execute this migrate command. Alright, in this video, we created our new Laravel project and then set up the database connection for our project. Let's move on to the next video and see how to create our first model, migration, and factory for our project. In this video, we will create our first model, migration, and factory for our app. The models are responsible for representing business data and logic. A model object is responsible for retrieving and persisting data in a certain table. For creating the table itself, you may use any SQL client tools such as phpMyAdmin, Table Plus, SQL Pro, or other tools. Although using them is more convenient, using migrations is much better. Migrations are like version control for our database. They will track all histories of our database structure. And if you're working with a team, then migrations allow you and your team to have the same database structure so your app will work properly. Then, to populate your database tables, you may manually insert some fake data using any SQL client tools. And again, Laravel provides a better way of doing that through model factories. Alright, let's open up our terminal and create a model using the artisan make model command. Then, we specify the model name. Or, in Laravel 10, we can omit the artisan make command's input, just like this, then hit Enter. Here I got a prompt asking me about the model name. In my case, I'll create a task model. Hit Enter. And I got another prompt asking me if I want to create these things: factory, form requests, migration, policy, resource controller, and seed. In my case, I'll enter one, since I want to create all of these things. As you can see here, it created the task model, task factory, created tasks table migration, task seeder, store task request, update task request, task controller, and task policy. Now, let's open up the Create Task Table migration. Here in the up method, let's add the necessary columns. For now, we'll add a name column and a type of string. Another column will be is completed, and it's going to be Boolean. And we'll give it a default value of false. Next, let's open up the task factory. Here in the definition method declaration, let's map the column names with values. The name column will be filled with the fake sentence. And for his completed column, we'll set it with a random number between 0 and 1. Next, let's go to the seeders folder. And here, we don't need the task seeder file. So, let's get rid of that. Then, let's open up the database seeder file. Inside the run method, let's clear everything. Then, we'll generate 10 tasks like so. Call the task model, and import its namespace. Then call factory. Specify the number, then followed by the create method call. Alright, let's give this a save. Switch back over to our terminal. Then migrate our task table migration and seed the tasks table by calling the migrate seed command. Okay, let me go to my database and see the task table. As you can see, the tasks table has been populated with 10 records. In this video, we'll create our first API endpoint. Alright, let's go to the app folder, then go to HTTP, and then controllers folder. Inside this folder, let's create a subfolder, API. Then, inside the API folder, let's create another subfolder, B1. Here, we have a task controller which placed inside the controllers folder. Now, let's move this file to the V1 folder. Let's open the file and adjust the namespace. Since this file has a different namespace from the base controller, let's import the base controller's namespace. Okay, let's go to the index method declaration. Let's remove the return type. Then inside the method, let's return all tasks that we have. Next, let's define routes for our API endpoint. Let's go to the routes folder. Then, since we will define routes for API, let's open up the API file. Inside this file, instead of defining a single route for our index action, let's define resource routes for our API endpoint using the API resource method. The path will be tasks, and the controller will be task controller. Let's also prefix the route path with v1. You may add it here. However, since we may define other routes in the future, let's put the v1 prefix in a route group like this. And now we put our task route declaration inside. Let's give it a save. Head over to our terminal and see our route by running this command. As you can see, we have resourceful routes for the task. Let's now access the task's index endpoint in our API client tools. You may use any API client tool that you prefer. In my case, I'll use Postman. Let me create a new collection. Inside the task collection, let's add a new request. I'll name it Retrieve Tasks. The HTTP verb will be GET, and the URL will be HTTP. Localhost :8000 API version 1. Tasks. Hit the Send button. And here we'll get back a list of tasks. In this video, we'll learn about Eloquent API Resources. As the name suggests, Eloquent API Resource is useful when building API. So it's basically a mechanism to transform your Eloquent model into JSON responses. It acts as a transformation layer between your Eloquent models and the JSON responses that are returned to your application's users. Alright, let's open up our terminal. Then, to create an API resource, we can call PHP artisan make resource. Let's call it task resource. Let's open up the file inside the resources folder. Then, in the toArray method declaration, let's return an array and define which attributes that will be exposed. In this case, ID from the task ID, and then name from the task name, and then is completed. From the task is completed. Next, let's head back to the task controller. Then, instead of returning an Eloquent collection like this, now we'll return the task resource. Since we'll return a collection of tasks, we call the collection method, then pass the collection in. Don't forget to import the task resource namespace. Now, while we're here, let's go to the show method. Inside the method, we'll return a single resource. So we call the task resource. Since we'll return a single task, we call the make method and pass in the task instance. Alright, let's give it a save. Back to Postman. Then hit the send button. Now we see our task collection wrapped in a data array. And each task only contains ID, name, and is completed. Now, for the isCompleted attribute, let's go back to the task resource and cast the isCompleted's value to a Boolean. Hit the send button again. It's now in a Boolean value. Okay, let's give this a save. Then duplicate the request. Let's change the name to retrieve a task. Then, we need to specify the task ID here. In my case, it's going to be 1. Hit the send button. And here I get back a single task. In this video, we'll create another API endpoint that allows users to persist data. To avoid unwanted data, we also validate the incoming request to meet our requirements. Let's switch over to our editor. Then go to the requests folder. Here, let's open the store task request. In the authorized method, let's return true since we don't want to perform any authorization. Next, in the rules method, let's define validation rules for the name column. It's going to be required string and maximum character 255. Okay, that's it for now. Let's now go to the task controller. Since we're building API, we don't need to define the create method. So let's get rid of that. Then, here in the store method, let's remove the redirect response return type. Inside the method, let's call the task model. Then save the incoming request by calling the create method. And then pass in the validated request data. The create method will return a model instance. We can assign it to a variable. After that, we can return the newly created task as a JSON response. So let's copy the code from the show method. Now, since we use the create method, we need to mass assignable the column. So let's go to the task model. Then specify the mass assignable column in the fillable attribute. Let's give it a save. Back to Postman. Duplicate this request. Change the name to storing a task. The HTTP variable will be post. The URL will be API version 1 tasks. Then, in the header, we need to add accept key. While the value will be application JSON. Next, let's go to the body. Choose the raw option. And the format will be JSON format. For now, we'll send an empty object to see if the validation is working as expected. Hit the send button. OK. Here we get a 422 unprocessable content error, which is the error that we expect. And here the error message, the name field is required. Now, let's enter the name here. Then hit the send button again. OK, the task has been created. And we'll get back the newly created task. In the last video, we created an API endpoint to persist the incoming request. Now, in this lesson, we'll be adding an endpoint that allows users to update their tasks, and another endpoint to mark the task as complete. Alright, let's switch over to our editor. Then, let's first open the update task request. Since we need the same validation rules as the store task request, let's remove everything inside the class. Then extend the class from the store task request. Let's get rid of the form request namespace import from here. OK, let's switch back over to the task controller. Here we don't need the edit method for our API. Just get rid of that. And in the update method, let's update the task by calling the task instance. Then call the update method. And then pass in the incoming request that has been validated. Once updated, we'll return it as a JSON response. So let's copy the code from here, then paste it here. And then remove the redirect response. Let's give this a save. Back to Postman. Duplicate this request. Rename it to updating a task. For the HTTP verb, we'll need a put method. In the URL, we need to specify the resource that we'll be updating. In my case, 11. Next, let's go to the body section. And for now, let's remove the name to see if the validation is working as expected. And indeed, it's working. Let me put back the name, and I'll update the task name to task1 updated. Let's hit the send button again. OK, the task has been updated successfully. Next, let's add another endpoint that allows users to mark the task as complete. Let's open up our terminal. Then create a new controller using the artisan make controller command. Let's hit enter. The controller name will be API. Version 1. Complete task controller. Hit enter again. And here, let's make it an invocable controller. So I'll enter 2. Let's open up the controller we just created. Inside the method, let's type hint the task model in the second argument. Import its namespace. Then remove the response return type. Then, inside here, let's update the isCompleted attribute. With the isCompleted that comes from the request. Then, to persist the change, let's call the save method. Once it is updated, we'll return the task resource. Let's import the namespace. And then pass the task instance in. Last, let's open up the API file. And then define a new route for our newly created controller. It's going to be patch. The route path is going to be tasks. It receives an argument, task. Then we'll be suffixing it with complete. And the controller will be the complete task controller. Okay, let's give it a save. Back to Postman. Save the request change. Then duplicate this request. Let's rename it to mark a task as complete. Here the HTTP verb will be patch. The URL will be localhost 8000 API version 1 tasks, task ID, and then complete. Then, in the body section, let's send is completed with a Boolean value. For now, let's give it true. Now, I'll hit the send button. Here the is completed is true. If I now change the value to false, then hit the send button again. The is completed now changes to false. In this video, we'll be adding another endpoint that allows users to delete their tasks. Let's switch over to our editor. Then go to the task controller. Here in the destroy method declaration, let's remove the redirect response return type. Then, inside the method, we call the task instance, followed by the delete method, to delete the task from the database. After that, we'll return no content response. Let's give it a save. Back to Postman. Then duplicate this request. Change the name to delete a task. The HTTP verb is going to be delete. Then, for the URL, it's going to be API version 1 tasks followed by the task ID. And here, we don't need to send a request body. So let's choose the none option. Let's hit the send button. Okay, here we get 204 response status. So, if we go to the retrieving tasks request, then hit the send button, we can't find the task with ID 11. Okay, that's it for now. In this section, we learned how to build CRUD, or create, read, update, and delete functionalities for our API. Let's move on to the next section and see how to make our RESTful API secure using Sanctum.